Hello, I'm Paul Louis Metzger, the Director of the Institute for Cultural Engagement, New Wine, New Wineskins. And it's my privilege today on New Wine Tastings to interview Mr. Steve Hanamura, who's a long-standing friend, a good friend of mine, and he's an advisor for us at New Wine, New Wineskins on our advisory council, and also he's the president of Hanamura Consulting. And Steve, thanks so much for making time in your busy schedule to meet for this interview.
Oh, thanks, Paul. My pleasure.
And we're talking about the theme of disabilities. Steve was one of our conference organizers recently for our conference on From Isolation to Invitation, a conference on disabilities. And so I'll be interviewing Steve on his story, his work, and his perspective on the theme of disability. So Steve, again, many thanks, and please share with us a portion of your own personal story related to being born blind and how you have navigated blindness throughout your life.
Well, thank you, Paul. And yes, I was born blind and in Colorado, and my parents were there because they were part of the Japanese internment experience and left home to go work and live in Colorado and Philadelphia. And then when we moved back to California, I went to the California School for the Blind and was away from home for 9 months out of the year. We lived in Southern California, but the School for the Blind was in Berkeley, which is across the bay from San Francisco. So my first few years were away from home and in a blind school with other blind students.
And I remember you talking about how that was just really hard when your parents took you there, and just I remember you talking about that at the conference, about the weightiness of being there in this new environment, and just there were a lot of challenges along the way, weren't there?
Oh, well, yeah, in the school itself we were sort of sheltered or cloistered off, but that was a time to groom, to learn how to read and write Braille. I was able to learn about sports, and we were our own little community, but the challenge was being away from home at that time more than the actual dealing with people. But when I went to high school, then I started interfacing with sighted students, and that's when the challenge around the issue of blindness really became more difficult. But the hard part as an elementary school student was being away from home.
So being away from home and then being more reacquainted and immersed in a context with people who, as you say, were sighted, what do you mind saying some of those challenges were? I mean, they may be obvious, but I still think it would be helpful.
We were being trained on how to be with sighted people. The goal was to assimilate, which, by the way, in diversity terms, you try to be like the majority dominant culture. And when you have a physical disability, there's no way you can, although we tried it, we would not touch each other, we would not use white canes. In fact, I'm amazed that many of us are still alive, because we would walk down the street and do things and not use a cane. I still am amazed that I'm here.
Well, and then I was actually leading Steve through a doorway this afternoon, and I did not do a very good job, and so again, I'm very sorry. So you did fine for all life until
that's right.
Until working with me today.
There'll be payback time. I'll get you back.
Right.
But it's kind of ironic that we would try so hard to be sighted that one time a blind friend and I were walking down the street, and my buddy fell into an open utility hole.
Oh,
but by gosh, we were sighted, and that was more important than falling into the holes. So,
but throughout your life, you've had to deal with that struggle of assimilation, right?
Yes,
because
yes.
I think whether we're talking about ethnicity, race, we'll come to that issue later,
right,
with prejudice and marginalization, but assimilation, that has just been an ongoing reality that you've had to deal with. Not to say that you affirm every aspect of quote-unquote assimilation, but could you speak to that?
Speaking to assimilation,
yeah,
I mean,
just that struggle.
The struggle of wanting to be like. Actually, there was a real strong connection between being Japanese and being blind. There's a whole generation of third-generation Japanese people who were never trained to speak Japanese at the face of needing to assimilate being in the dominant American culture. Especially after coming back from World War II, we were trained not to speak Japanese, but to speak English, so we would be just like Americans. In like manner, when you can't see, you try to be like a sighted person, and you really can't. You're in total denial about your disability, but obviously it didn't work. And there were times when I would have to hang on to somebody's arm or use the white cane or something like that, which now is not a problem, but back in the day, it was a huge problem.
Some people in the disability community refer to themselves as being the objects of prejudice and discrimination. What is that like for you, as you've already alluded to it, as a Japanese person born blind around the time of World War II?
Around the time of World War II, it was really hard, although truthfully I was shielded from some of the Japanese discrimination because I was at the blind school. But my brother and my parents really took it. And then I took it when I started going to a regular high school and in college. I got to experience the discrimination, not knowing for me, was it because I'm blind or because I'm Japanese. I felt the impact, but I never knew what was the real reason for the discrimination.
And so sometimes it's hard, and I've heard you say this recently, it's hard to know where the discrimination is coming from or what's the angle, so to speak, because you're Japanese, you're also someone who's blind, and so you've had to deal with that particular issue, trying to account for and discern what's really going on.
Yeah, what's really going on, especially going out on dates or not getting a date. That was a big one. Was it because I'm blind, because I'm Japanese, and sometimes it was both. It was a frightening thing for other people. And then around getting job opportunities, that again, I didn't have too much problem because of I was in a practicum at the University of Oregon, and so the potential employer saw me because I was a practicum student on the Lane Community College campus, which diffused, and in fact the Dean of Students was really forthright about it. He said, had I not seen you in a practicum experience, I probably wouldn't have hired you because I wouldn't have known of your capabilities. So we totally were able to redirect and diffuse him and tease each other and all of that because he got to experience me as a practicum student.
It does require a lot of resilience, though, doesn't it? I mean, when you think about all that you've experienced, endured, and today, not that I'm trying to make it like some success story, from rags to riches. I don't mean to go
Yeah,
around
you
like
don't
that,
mean the
but-
amazing inspiration.
Yeah, but it's just
Yeah.
more to me the inspiration of just facing these challenges, these obstacles. You still found a way to look at them as opportunities, and it challenges me to grow in resilience in terms of the struggles I face.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to speak to that issue of the resilience muscle and how you've had to encounter struggles in such a way that you've turned them into opportunities and not just obstacles.
I think before resilience, I'd call it the fighter mentality. And there's a plus and a minus to that. The resilience is the plus side of having a fighter mentality. But the fighter mentality can also be wearing a chip on your shoulder and turning people off and not giving people the benefit of the doubt. So there is that creative tension between resilience and fighter mentality. Fighter mentality coming back because I can do something versus you won't let me do it because of your perception of me. Those are two different conversations, but I can never distinguish which one is which.
Not easy,
No,
to say the
no.
least. Steve, you have mentioned in my hearing how African Americans at the times of Rosa Parks were at the back of the bus, but that people with disabilities were not even on the bus. Can you please unpack that statement?
Oh, that's a powerful experience and statement I like to call upon. Disabilities, even visible disabilities, are the unnoticed people. And I don't even think of you as blind. It's meant to be a compliment, but the reality is that's a put down because my blindness is part of who I am. And so the unpacking of that at that time in history, it wasn't until the 1960s when my blind colleague and I met some African American black folks and we began to share our war stories, found out how similar we were in terms of the impact of discrimination. The reasons for the discrimination were different, but it had the same impact of you're not important, you don't count, you're not as good as, all of that came to be the same. So disability wasn't even in the conversation in 1955, where I think it wasn't until the 1980s that the disability started to get more noticed in terms of the larger narrative.
In your estimation, how have things changed over the years, for better or for worse, concerning advocacy, awareness, and opportunities for people with disabilities?
It's interesting you asked that question. I'm presently, as we speak, being asked to be a book reviewer for a book called The Power of Disabilities. And this author is writing about disability. And what's different about his book, it's about 21st century people. In the 21st century, disability is finally in the conversation. We have a much wider definition of what disability is. More attention is being paid to developmental disabilities, autism, Down syndrome. That would have never been in the narrative, even in the latter part of the 20th century in the 1990s. So I'm pleased to say that there's more attention being given now to disability than was the case even at the latter part of the 20th century.
What would you recommend to our viewers concerning greater sensitivity, relationality, and advocacy pertaining to engaging the disability community?
I think be inquisitive, be curious, don't be afraid to ask questions. I don't know if, I feel funny saying don't be afraid because we're all struck by hesitancy, or so maybe it's own your fear or own your hesitancy, but still ask questions, be inquisitive. And I call it pause, think, and redirect. If there's something that bothers you about disability or that scares you, notice what it is, but don't let it rule how you behave towards other people.
Would you mind sharing a couple of questions that could be helpful for people learning how to ask questions or to engage? Like even if they see someone who's blind standing there, you know, and they want to offer help, what would you
Just say, ask if the person needs help, and if they say yes, then let the person direct you on how to be helpful, and also accept the answer, no, I'm okay, I don't need help, but thank you very much. A lot of times people will insist on helping you after you've told them, no, I'm okay, I don't need help.
Any other recommendations, you know, just concrete statements for getting beyond those fears?
This is my first time around a disability, how do I help someone, or how do I help you?
Or just even trying to break the ice. And getting beyond those, you know, well, I didn't even think of you as someone with, you know, not to say that type of thing, but any thoughts on conversation icebreakers?
Tell me about yourself. Where have you grown up? And I see that you
just
have a
normal
disability.
questions, right?
Just normal questions.
Just normal questions.
Normal questions.
Yeah, because these are normal people, just
Right.
like I hope to be someday. So, lastly, Steve, what closing thoughts would you like to share with our viewers?
Well, the closing thought is stay curious, and it's okay to ask questions, but also be accepting of the answers that you get back from the individual, because we're all, believe it or not, we're not all the same. Even all blind people aren't the same, and that's the falsehood of this, is that you've met one person with a disability so that we're all like that, and that's not true.
Well, Steve, I've been very grateful for your friendship and your influence on me and on New Wine, New Wineskins. I think even with the Disabilities Conference, if it hadn't been for you and Trudy and others like yourselves with your passion, your vision, I don't think we'd have done the conference, and it's been insightful, inspirational for me, and I'm just really grateful, and I look forward to more opportunities to partner with you in this domain and elsewhere.
Well, before we stop the tape, I want to thank you for even agreeing to hear it, because when Trudy and I came to you, you could have said no, but you did more than that. You not only said yes, but you embraced it, and you're embracing it to continue on the disability conversation. So thank you for your receptiveness.
Well, I look forward to the ongoing partnership.
Okay.
So, again, Steve Hanamura of Hanamura Consulting and Paul Louis Metzger, Director of New Wine, New Wineskins, thank you for joining us for New Wine Tastings.